Next, I would like to show how some of this information applies at the piano. What a difference this can make in the way we sit and move at the piano. The first thing to talk about is just the act of sitting. And so with the model, I will talk briefly about that. In principle, sitting is like almost nothing, because if a person is standing in balance, then the legs bend here at the hip joint, and so they're moved out of the way, and weight can be delivered to the sit bones. The legs bend and place the torso on the chair. The balance of the entire torso remains the same, whether we're standing or sitting. It's identical if the person is doing it properly. Just you put the sit bones down on the chair, and there you are in balance. So I'll come back to some of the ways in which people may fail to do that, but first I will show what it looks like at the piano. If I sit at the piano, it looks like this. It doesn't really look like much of anything. It's just sitting. But I'm balanced. I'm aware of my AO joint. I'm aware of my lumbar spine. I'm aware of weight delivered through my sit bones to the bench. I'm aware of the fact that my arms can move freely. I can move to wherever I have to go on the keyboard with ease, and I move in accordance with what we have called the laws of the spine. If I have to move to the side, my head leads, and then there's a movement of my entire spine, a movement that's distributed over the whole length of it, with no one part absorbing more than its share of the movement. I'm conscious of movement all the way down to the bench. So the head leads, the spine, the vertebrae follow in sequence. The movement is distributed over the whole spine, and that's what those principles are what we've called the laws of the spine in the book. And if I move that way, it looks like this. If I have to move to the upper part of the keyboard, I simply feel that my head releases in this direction, and I feel very secure. I can get all the way to the extreme of the keyboard, and yet it does not feel like a large movement, and I don't feel the least bit off balance. I can play here if I need to. I can get where I need to go by feeling that coordination of my entire spine, leading with my head. The motions feel small, and yet I can securely reach places that I need to be. What happens when people fail to sit in balance? First of all, you might be sitting this way and yet not follow the laws of the spine in your movement. Some people, instead of leading with the head this way, may lead with their shoulders. You may get a movement like this. Now it feels like a big distance, and I feel tension up and down my spine. I'll do that again. I'm fine, but if I move like this, I'm sort of twisting myself. It's as if my head is staying back. If I believe that my head has to stay here to look at the music and try to lean sideways this way, I've sort of contorted my spine and compressed parts of it. I no longer feel that I can play comfortably. If I do it properly, it looks like this, and it feels like a smaller movement, and I can still see the music. Another thing that I might do would be to bend sideways from the waist like this. Again, I'm tightening my spine, and I feel that I can't play. I feel that I have no power in my arms if I move this way. So I'm sort of caving over instead of allowing my head to take me in a balanced way to where I have to go. So you can see that it looks quite different if you lead with your head compared to the way it looks if you lead with some other part of your spine, or if you bend from the waist like this. Another thing that pianists will sometimes do is they will sit down and then they've been told that they need to sit up straight. And so they do this. I can't play this way, not at my best, because this motion of lining myself up, pulling myself up as I imagine it, to sit up straight, I'm following the posture myths of shoulders back, chest out, and all of that. I accomplish that with muscles in my back which inhibit the movement of my arms. I don't know what you think of the way this looks, but I know that there are books in which this way of sitting is described as exemplary. In my opinion, all it exemplifies is bad use, because I can't imagine anybody playing well or playing at their best who sits this way. If I'm in balance, I will allow the weight to come a little bit forward. Another thing, however, that people may do is, it's sort of a worse version of what I just demonstrated. In addition to throwing the weight back, being back-oriented, they will arch their lower back this way. So now things are even worse. I feel tightness here in my lower back. I feel that I can hardly move. But you can see the difference. I'm overarching. If you have a habit of overarching, then when you come to balance, it will feel as if you're allowing your lower back to slump outwards. And you will imagine that that's not allowed. You may think that that you're slumping over, whereas in fact you're simply coming back to balance. If you have a habit of overarching this way, being in balance will at first feel like slumping. But it is an important thing to be aware of. Many pianists are back-oriented in one or another way. There is this, which I demonstrated before, then there is the overarching like this, and those are both very, very common. Another thing that many pianists do, we all are, of course, concerned about what we're doing with our hands at the keyboard, and so we look at that intently. And I may fix on the action of my fingers. And now, what has happened is that I have allowed my head to lock into a kind of position where it's no longer, it's sort of tied to my neck. So I move this way. My head and neck are not free in relation to each other. This is what I call a head-neck unit. A lot of people, or many people many people try to play this way. I'm guessing that none of the things that I'm demonstrating looks unfamiliar to you. But this is a tense way of moving with my head and neck in this relationship. The tension in my neck affects the freedom with which I can move my arms. And of course, any of these things, if they become chronic, can lead to pain. What the person needs to do is be aware of the point of balance of the head, feeling the relationship of that point of balance with the lumbar spine and the sit bones against the chair. Be aware of that length at all times and allow the head to take you where you need to go. So the head-neck unit is something to watch for. Another thing that pianists do is to tighten their shoulders. Many times you'll see people whose shoulders are stiff, like this, and they try to play with this kind of movement. I'm moving from my shoulder joint, tightening the entire shoulder area in what I will later call a shoulder arm split, as if my shoulder was one thing and my arm another. I'll come back to that when I talk about the arm structure. Now, there are other forms of being back-oriented. One of them comes about this way. A person might stand and look more or less all right, and then when they come to sit, they do this. What you can see is that my pelvis has tilted backwards, throwing the weight back toward my tailbone. If I show you on the model, the pelvis has been tilted this way, so that, and some people even tilt so far back that it puts weight on the tailbone, which can lead to dreadful pain. Well, if the weight is thrown back this way, then of course you have to compensate with muscles to keep from falling over. So I'll show what that looks like again. Well, how did I get into that? What happened was that I bent from my waist, as if in sitting, the waist were a joint, and that was where the motion occurred. If I think that way, then I'm likely to be sitting this way once I reach the bench. And in this position, I can't possibly, there's no compensation which will correct this, except to allow the pelvis to tilt, to bend more at the hip joint, so that the weight can be delivered to the sit bones, and my head and lumbar spine can be aligned in relation to the sit bones. So when you sit, it's important to be aware of the entire length of the torso. If you have a habit of bending from the waist, then learning to sit may take some attention, because what you will need to do, instead of bending at the waist, is to be conscious that the bending occurs at the hip joint, knee, and ankle. And when you do that at first, it's likely to feel as if you're thrusting your butt outward. Some people believe that their butts should be inconspicuous at all times, and it's as if they tried to make them as small as possible, and so they sit this way. And this is, whatever you think of the look, it's not a way to play the piano. You have to allow yourself for a while to protrude backwards, and when you have absorbed that feeling, it won't actually look like anything unusual, but it will feel unusual to you at first if you have a habit of bending from the waist. This is one example of something that comes up quite a lot. When we have a habit, a bad habit, whatever it is, and we learn a better way, the better way sometimes feels unnatural and exaggerated at first. And we simply have to get used to the idea that it is the better way. So bending from the waist instead of bending from the hip joint is something to be very aware of if that's a habit that you've had. There's a further reason why people may sit with the pelvis tilted backwards, forcing them into a back-oriented way of sitting. The reason is that some people have the backs of their legs, their hamstring muscles, may simply be habitually contracted so that they don't stretch easily. When you bend your leg to sit, the muscle must extend, and if the muscle is tight, it may not want to do that. So here's something that you can do, that is, or at least to check. If you have difficulty squatting, for example, that suggests that your hamstrings might be in need of a gentle stretching routine. If this is difficult for you to do, then it may be that you have hamstrings which are shortened, and a gentle routine of stretching would be beneficial and permit you more easily to sit in balance at the piano. There's another aspect of sitting which is very important to understand, which is the motion that occurs at our hip joint as we sit. I mentioned that when we sit, the leg bends out of the way, and which permits us to put the sit bones down on the chair. That's true, but there is one thing that can get in the way. Many people, when they stand, have a habit of being tight in their butt muscles. That causes your legs to torque outward because there's a rotational movement at the hip joint, so that if a person's butt muscles are tight and they're standing up, that may cause a turning this way, a rotational movement of their leg. Then their feet will point outward, that is, their toes point away from each other. I may be exaggerating a little. Your shoes may wear unevenly if you have a habit of tension in your butt muscles, which brings about this rotation. The only way to come out of that is to release the butt muscles so that your legs can release and your toes point forward. Again, there are posture myths and other myths in our culture about tucking in your butt and things like that. I urge you to forget about all of those things and allow your butt to be loose and as broad as it naturally is, because then your legs will be able to be free and pointing frontward. Now, that turns out to be absolutely vital for pianists, because if somebody has a habit of rotating the legs outward because of tension in their butt, then the femur will be in this kind of position. If the person sits without releasing that rotational tension, then the femur will be turned down like this, you see, and so that it won't really be out of the way, so that the weight can go onto the sit bones. The femur will be down here instead of out here. So the femur will be here instead of out there. That will mean that in sitting, the person will have weight on the back of their legs instead of on their sit bones. I'll show something of that at the piano. It is really important to be able to sit so that the femur is rotated out to the side so that you can feel the sit bones delivering weight to the bench. When I sit this way, I can move my legs wherever I wish. I can move my legs back. If you watch videotapes of Rubinstein, his legs go all over the place. He was a very free player. I can move my legs without any sense of being off balance. I can put my legs wherever I wish and at the same time reach different parts of the keyboard. Obviously, much of the time my right foot is going to be on the damper pedal, but my left foot can go where it likes, and if I'm not pedaling, I can put my foot, and the weight is delivered to the chair, and my legs can move. Not only that, but I can pedal without disturbing the balance. Pedaling involves slight movements of the ankle joint, the knee joint, and because the ankle joint is not right at the tip of the heel, when I move my foot up and down to pedal, that causes my knee to go up and down slightly, which means that there is slight motion here at my hip joint. All of that is easy if I am sitting in balance with weight on my sit bones. But if I have been standing with my feet torqued outward, and if I sit without releasing that, I'm now sitting in the way I demonstrated on the model, with my legs turned so that the femurs are down and weight is thrown onto the back of my legs. Now I feel I can hardly move. If I try to pedal, I feel that each movement of pedaling throws me off balance. Consequently, I tense the muscles of my legs and my lower back in order not to fall over, or at least in order to try to stabilize myself, because the weight is in the wrong place. Every time I pedal, it sort of undermines my balance. And so I have tension everywhere in my legs and lower torso to compensate for that. Again, there are people who develop pain from pedaling, and if you are one of those people, it will be especially important for you to realize that you must allow this rotational movement, rotational release of your butt muscles, which will permit the legs, the upper part of your leg, to rotate enough out to the sides so that they're not in the way of the weight delivery to your sit bones. One thing that can be helpful is to find those structures on yourself. You can feel where your legs are. You may even decide now and then to use your hands to sort of pull your legs out to the right position. Once you've learned to do this, you won't have to do it in performance. You'll be able to sit down properly. But to get the proper sense of where your sit bones are, it may be helpful for a while to use your hands to explore and to find that balance. Now, again, I can move my legs where I need them to go. I can pedal without throwing myself off balance, and I can do that no matter where I have to be on the keyboard. So that rotational release of the hip joint is very, very important. What do you do if you've been chronically off balance? How do you find a place of balance? Well, let's pretend that I have a habit of sitting this way. My back is overarched, my lumbar spine is overarched. I'm throwing the weight backwards. I'm tense all up and down through my shoulder area. I'm exhibiting a sort of extreme of back orientation, which is very, very uncomfortable. So what do I do? This is, I'm supposing, this is what I believe sitting up straight should be, because that's what I was taught, or that's what I've somehow absorbed. Well, how do I go to a better place? Here's a routine that you can do. Try to be aware of the places of balance that we've talked about. Try to know where they are. And just allow yourself to stretch out this way. Lean forward with your arms out to the sides of the piano. Try to feel a lengthening from your hip joint and sit bones all the way up through your head. A sort of a gentle stretching. It's sort of pleasant just to stretch this way. Allow yourself to feel as much length and as much widening as you can. And when you've experienced that for a moment, allow your head to lead you upward. Feel that it sort of floats you upward, but with constant attention to the relationship between the AO joint, the lumbar spine, and the hip joint and sit bones. Being aware of those, come up quite slowly and try to notice exactly when they become vertically lined up with one another and stop. That will probably be forward of what you've been used to, and it may feel that you are slumping forward. But I don't believe that I'm slumping forward, I'm just sitting. If you feel that you're slumping forward, do this and look in a mirror when you find the place of balance to verify that what feels slumped forward because of your former habits is really just upright. Notice that when you find this place of balance, your playing will instantly improve if you have had a custom, or had a habit, that is, of back orientation. Not only that, but if you've had experience of back and shoulder pain, which many people, many pianists have, you will be on your way to recovery when you learn to find the place of balance where your arms can move and the core support can hold you up. When you're sitting this way, you can, one image that's sometimes helpful is to think of the core support up the center of your body as if it were a tent pole, the sort of tent that has a pole up the middle and the tent hangs down on all sides. Allow that pole, you don't want to think of it as a rigid, straight pole because your spine is actually curved, but think of it as a support up the center, and it's as if you can hang down on all sides, just like the tent. You can release the muscles in front, you can release the muscles in back, and your core support holds you up. There's another thing that people may do if they are seated so that the pelvis is tilted back. My pelvis is tilted back. Before, I pointed out how people may try to sit up straight this way. But of course, an alternative is to slump over this way so that the front part of the body falls forward. And so somebody might sit like that. Now there's still tension throughout my back, but not exactly the same way. And from this position, I need to do quite a lot of work to get my arms up to play. So now a lot of work has to occur here with these muscles to lift my arms to play. If I play this way, sometimes I will experience symptoms not in my back and shoulders, but in my arms. It's one situation where the person may not realize that the problem comes from the way they're sitting, because that's not where they first experience the pain. There are many variations, but in any case, the solution, as with some of the other things we've talked about, consists of, first of all, bending sufficiently at the hip joint so that the pelvis can be aligned and the weight go to the sit bones, and then being aware of the AO joint and relationship up and down the spine. It's desirable to cultivate a habit of constant awareness of the length between your AO joint and your sit bones, where you have contact with the bench. Feel that as a sort of the constant relationship, a constant, it moves, but you're always aware of that length, and that helps to organize movement and helps you to get wherever you need to go.